you said you were at the Dolphins Bucks practices, joint practice together. Were you there when the Tua comments about Brian Flores came out?
A little bit after, yeah.
Okay, so what was the conversation about that then?
I think it's just Tua. When I ask people about it, it's interesting. It's like that's Tua to a fault. Like he's just honest, and if you ask him, especially in a setting like that, like that Dan and the guys had him in, like you're going to get an honest answer. And I don't know how often he's been asked about Flores, because they played so well the last couple of years, because he personally has done so well, and obviously has had some other things going on with the concussions and everything else. I don't know that anybody's really been diving into it the way that they did on the Levitard show. So, I think, it's just sort of his honest truth. And what was really interesting about it to me is, we talk about this stuff being generational and everything else. Do people forget what program Tua came from? Like
exactly.
Like
that's the whole thing. Like, anybody who's sitting here saying he can't take tough coaching, it's just like, get out of here, So
here's the thing.
But it's obvious that Flores never wanted him, right? I mean, like this now confirms it, right?
And I think that's part of the problem, right? Like, so part of the problem is like that, Flo, and there was some disagreement, and obviously it was close on who they were picking there, Tua or Herbert. And, I think some of this could be harboring some of that. I also think it's like part of it's like where Brian Flores had been and how he'd coached guys in the past and how he'd seen guys coach in the past. I mean, it's legendary the way Bill Belichick coached Tom Brady, right? And Belichick's philosophy had always been, you coach the best players the hardest, and then everybody else falls in line. It's just sort of the way it is. And so that's how Brian Flores coached Tua. I think one thing that's interesting though here, and this part is generational, is how I think Nick Saban doesn't get credit for tailoring his coaching to the individual players and what the individual players need. And I think the best guys do that. And I think that's one thing that Brian Flores has learned from going through this. And I think he's learned a lot from going through this, because he's always been a guy who's been loved by the players, like, right? Except for the Miami thing. Ask Devin McCourty about him. Ask Kyle Van Noy about him. Ask Dante Hightower about him. Ask the guys in Minnesota now, guys like Harrison Smith about him.
But
right?
defensive players are different than quarterbacks, man.
And that's the thing, and that's the lesson, right? Like, so that's the lesson. And here, I'll give you a really, really interesting story on CJ Stroud that I think explains this to a T, right? So, like last year, when the Texans were looking at who they were going to take second overall, Bobby Slowick, their offensive coordinator, got after CJ Stroud in the 30 visit pretty good. And CJ kind of shut down. And it was a way of testing him. And this happens a lot, right? Like, so he shut down. And I heard about that. And that's a reason why I didn't mock Stroud to the Texans. So then, afterwards, I circled back and I kind of dug in a little bit more and tried to figure out what happened. And as it turns out, D'Amico Ryans and Nick Caserio then went back to the people at Ohio State and asked them about CJ and said, well, this kid's been through a lot in his life, so he's not going to, react to, a football coach who he doesn't know, teaching him that, coaching him that intensely. You have to earn his trust. And not only did that get them to dig in more and wind up taking CJ Stroud, it also informed the way they coached CJ Stroud when they got him, So, and you think about that, right? Like how, what a great testament to the Texans organization that is that they set something up that didn't work for the player. They went and doubled back and checked into it again. And then like the lessons they learned not only wound up, putting them in position to draft the guy, but then, inform the way that they're teaching him going forward. I thought it was fascinating. And, I think that that's sort of the lesson you can learn from these situations is that, D'Amico and Bobby came from a very tough system in San Francisco. Kyle Shanahan coaches really hard, right? But you learn how to package it a little differently for every player. And I think that that's what's interesting about what Mike McDaniel's doing in Miami as well. And I know I'm being long-winded here, so I'm sorry about that.
Just, Albert,
but I think that's what Mike McDaniel is demanding as hell as a coach. But he packages it a little differently for every player. And those players know he has their back, And so I think that that's probably a lesson that Flores takes from it. I think Flores is a fantastic coach. People forget his last, 2 years there, they won 19 games. That's one less than Mike McDaniel's won the last 2 years following Flores in Miami. So it's not like Flores wasn't a really good head coach. Like, he did plenty of good there. But with maybe the most important relationship in the building, he failed. And, it's my feeling, at least, that he's learned a lot from it.
Yeah. These not these quarterbacks, and certainly this generation of players, there's an operation manual. And it seems like McDaniel had it better for Tua than Flores did. And clearly DeMeco Ryans and the rest of the Texans found the operation manual for C.J. Stroud, and it led to a unicorn season. I mean, I appreciate you lending that perspective. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.